Open your mind's door to JSNP4. Open your mind's door to JSNP4. American dream, relocated to Tennessee. Now he's on 10 acres, GMO free. Planting info seeds in the minds of the sheep.
Alright, time for a WebBot update. As I promised. I just couldn't do it last night. Didn't have time. And you know how I told you, I may have mentioned I had my car sold. Guy came over Sunday to get it. Wanted to go for a test drive. Went for a test drive. We turn around, go back up the street. I start to see smoke pouring out of the back. Pull up in the driveway. I'm smelling antifreeze all over the place. Look under the hood. It's smoking everywhere from the antifreeze. And the nipple that is on the intake manifold, upper intake manifold, snapped off. They made these things of plastic, the whole intake manifold, which is absurd, but they do. So I have to now replace the entire upper intake manifold. But thankfully, JSNP4 used to be mechanic, and I'm doing it myself. $175 for the entire brand new upper manifold. I'm going to have to fix that. And I'm having second thoughts. I may keep the car. Sorry to tell you that. Anyways, on to the WebBot report. This is in no particular order, although it's definitely from the beginning as I'm reading it. I'm taking notes, but one paragraph to the next paragraph may not be in the WebBot report back to back. I may have skipped a bunch and then added something else, so don't feel kind of weird or like, what the hell, how did you jump to that? It's because I just put it in that order. So, like I always do. And disclaimer immediately. Following the WebWatch for years, and sometimes the timing is not right. Usually the events are right, and even then, not always right. Right enough for me to pay attention, and right enough for me to do this report for you, because they do get enough things right that makes me concerned. So I'm gonna continue to read them and take them, put some weight on them. So, food supply, and again, let me stop. Sorry. When I see this stuff and it's talking about the first half of 2013 and stuff, I got to be honest. I just don't feel like everything mentioned in here is going to happen that quick. Number one, I've never seen anything in the web reports happen that quick all in the span of, the next 6 months or whatever. Never. So I don't know that any of this stuff will be in the next 6 months or even all of 2013. However, it's the stuff that they say that just pay attention to that. Forget the dates and the time frames. Just pay attention to what they say, because that stuff happens. And it happens soon enough. So, food supply risks will become very visible from early in January 2013 through to mid-May. From mid-May onward, while the concern is still with food supplies and food costs, the latter no longer dominates. This is a very clear shift in the language, forecasting a different focus for the concerns about food supply. Whereas through nearly all of the first half of the year, the food costs data sets are more than twice the total emotional numeric sum of the food supply at risk data sets. Over the course of the second half of the year, the food supply at risk data set has risen to be the dominating point of emotional focus for the populace. Stated another way for clarity, of the two concerns, costs and availability of food, the costs will dominate through May, but afterward the availability is the primary concern. The first visible concerns of drought in the planetary breadbasket areas will be replaced over the first half of 2013 with needs that are described as desperate. Much of the needs language is supported by sets that describe hunts, as in hunting, and scavenging in great detail. The growth of these data sets alone is supportive of the idea of bifurcated year in which a shattering of the existent paradigm takes place, while the first half of 2013, as regards the planetary food body, will be filled with language towards costs rather than availability. There is a shift between the two that will occur gradually from about March onward. Over the next few months, that is through April and May, the language shows definitive shift from complaining about costs to complaining about lack of items. Over the first half of 2013, the language will begin strongly with costs of food seen as a driving political and dominating emotional concern for much of the populace of the planet. as the costs are forecast to escalate both rapidly and with sporadic jumps as specific events manifest. The language within the mainstream media will increasingly diverge from language around the same subjects within the alternative media. This is an example of bifurcation of the social body as it is driven by media sources, manifesting a clear line of separation within the body politic or social order of the planet. The idea that presents itself from the complexities of our situation is that a line of demarcation, or a visible pulling away, will be taking place over these first 4 months of 2013, which will allow for those who have the will and knowledge to perceive a very clear view of the separation of camps, if you will, among humans. The idea here is that dwindling numbers of the sheeple are confronted with a leaving, in which a significant portion of the populace begins to act as though they no longer accept authority from the minions, of course, of the powers that be, which would be your elected officials and police or whatever, Another way of looking at this effect is that the awake and aware populace has grown to such an extent that it now forms a clearly visible, large and growing, significant minority of the populace. As you may know, I'm going to stop for a second. I volunteer for the local sheriff's office, as I've mentioned many times. And I was out every month. We're allowed to do a ride-along with the deputy if we want as part of the sheriff's office, whereas a normal person can only go once a year. So I decided last night, New Year's, let me go check out what's going on. So I went and rode with the deputy. And while I was waiting for him to come pick me up at the station, I'm overhearing two older deputies, one of them of rank, at least a sergeant. I don't know if he was a lieutenant. I think he was a sergeant. And they were both talking, and one of them had a friend, and they're talking about the 223 ammo that's out of stock everywhere because everyone went crazy buying guns and ammo. And he mentioned to the other deputy, or the sergeant actually, that, my buddy, if you know if anybody who's got such and such, let me know, because he definitely wants some more ammo or something. And he's one of those kind of prepper guys, one of those people. Yeah, he's really into that, and he's definitely looking for some ammo. But he didn't say it like, oh, he's one of these nuts. He's one of these prepper guys. He said it matter-of-factly. Oh, it's almost like saying, he's one of those guys that works on cars, auto mechanic. That's how he said it. He's one of those guys that say like those little prepper things. Yeah, he's all into that. A deputy telling his commanding officer, in this case a sergeant, and they're both just continue with the conversation as if it was normal. I was actually shocked, to be honest. I was ready to jump in on that conversation, and I did say one thing, and then I stopped, and I said, that's why I have an AK-47, because everybody's got a 223. The military, the police, everyone has it. Not everybody's got an AK. There's plenty of that ammo still available. That's all I said. Didn't want to go into the old JSNIP 4 mode right then and there, so back on track here. It is as though the populace of sheeple will find that in the course of their ordinary day, running into other sheeple, they stop and note, for example, quote, say, whatever happened to Jane and Joe so-and-so? Haven't seen them for like ages. What's up with that? And the response is a rather nervous laugh, followed by, quote, oh, I think she and he went prepper. And then they ended up divorced. Or no, I think she went prepper, or one of them. One of them went prepper, and they got divorced. This last said with surreptitious glances around as an extra few items are hurriedly put into the shopping cart. Crisis situation. Oh, hey, fancy seeing you here, as they're getting stuff off the shelves kind of thing. Hey, whatever happened to Joe and Evelyn? Used to live over in Brandon, Florida. Me, my wife. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they went up north to Tennessee to prep. Let's continue packing our cart full because there's a crisis. That's what that example was in the webbot. During January, a political crisis within the globalist agenda will emerge such that food prices globally will begin to rise in currencies as well as in visibility within the globalist MSN, mainstream media, as their slant on the food crisis is made apparent. There are many indications of a temporal link between the food crisis costs and a political crisis within the powers that be, and an economic scandal at a global level. These are very complex times, and the nature of these scandals is both complex and complicated. With the food prices scandal, there will emerge language that points to individuals within the minion classes down to the CFR / which is Council on Foreign Relations / Tavistokians, who will be also be the subjects of investigations for their roles in the child / woman kidnapping, rape / molestation / murder criminal gangs that are now the titular leaders of the planet. Our forecast is that as the food crisis language matures over January and February, it will begin to merge with other crises within society centered around a small and specific group of individual humans. Some are banksters, by the way, many of whom will not live to see their names involved in these scandals, as we expect a spate of bankster accidental suicides. Along with the suicide wave within the banksters class, we expect that there will be increasing reports of blatant murder, as in professional hits against banksters and their close associates / families. Next is something titled The Naked Queens and Really Bad Bets. So Naked Queens and Really Bad Bets, the title of this next one. The systemic separations subset includes descriptors going to the idea that the systems will come separated from each other. A series of growth spurts in the data sets gathered from October 2011, so this is data from going back that far, onward focuses into the heart of the word separation. There are repeated references to pulling apart, distancing, at odds with others, self-survival impulses. These sets are clustered around the primary supporting sets for separation of the financial systems, which include a plethora of repetition of exposure as a keyword and concept. We have temporal markers that chain off of the firefighters fight injustice ? Word set, which had been hit recently, that meme. Word set in it itself a major temporal marker in which we note that queen, and then it has an S with the parentheses, so queen or queens. Queens will be exposed, and exposure of the failure of surety, which he says a method deemed unfailable will fail. These next two temporal markers are both wide in the sense that we expect multiple examples of the language to appear in the mainstream media whores. Both of these temporal marker sets are forecast to manifest prior to the first run-up in silver prices denominated in Federal Reserve notes, aka in US dollars. Note that the Queen's exposed temporal marker has started to appear by the date of this publication, December 31st, 2012. I'm going to turn the volume down on my mic a tiny bit because the dryer is now going behind me. I'm going to go ahead and edit these two videos and put them together for you. Next, strip mining the populace. The first run up in dollar prices of silver is itself a temporal marker for a following push by mainstream media whores and officialdom for the great dishoarding. In this data set is supporting sets pointing to a concerted effort to strip mine the populace of precious metals in a scheme to vacuum up the silver and gold, though less focused on the gold, that is resident in houses. This great dishoarding is described as being backed by some very serious banksters who are even now apparently building the organization to strip mine the populace. The data sets point to the near crash of the currency relationships almost immediately following the great dishoarding, such that riots over theft by fraud will take place around silver exchanges. That part of the populace that is tricked, don't be tricked, okay? That part of the populace that is tricked in the great dishoarding will feel cheated, as their dollars are almost instantly devalued by both officialdom and market forces. In other words, I remember, not in this, obviously this Webite report, but the prior one, I believe, Cliff High was talking about, like For example, you see all of these cash for gold commercials on almost every TV station sooner or later, right? Just cash for gold, cash for gold. He said he's thinking that you're going to start seeing something similar to cash for gold, except cash for silver or something for silver along those lines. I think that's what he's touching on here, even though he doesn't exactly say that. This is just a little more detail on that. There's some scheme they're going to pull to get silver out of the household, whether it's silver, spoons and silverware, literally silverware, which is interesting where that term came from, silverware, because it used to be pure silver. And there's antibacterial properties in silver, so that's probably a good item to use when you're eating things. But nowadays, we have stuff that looks like silver from China. And I have a feeling, a little sneaky suspicion, that when you're scraping your teeth off of that spoon or fork or whatever, probably not something you want to digest. That's just my 2 cents. Now, back on track. These temporal markers and other data sets, lead us to the forecast that a steep rise in silver prices will be met by a burst of drawing in or selling that will cause a downdraft on dollar-denominated prices, but that this pressure on silver and gold will be remarkably short, to be followed by greater steep-angled price rise that continues into the rest of the decade, or until markets end, whichever comes first. Note that the word remarkably is in a bracket, and the keywords on the webbot are in brackets all of the time. That the actual keywords that the data is pulling back are in brackets. As I'm sitting here reading it to you, you may hear me give a little emphasis sometimes. That's usually me trying to let you know that that was one of the words, but not always. Sometimes I just read right through it. So what he's saying is the word remarkably short. Remarkably. Note that the word remarkably is in a bracket. This is due to its nature as a temporal marker itself for the global coastal event and other forecasts. The data suggests that even the mainstream media whore prostitutes will be discussing how rapid the silver precious metal prices were fluctuating. Again, these visibility flagged data sets about the remarkable ability of the price changes are themselves temporal markers for the dollar collapse. Internal markets. Okay, let me read that last sentence. I didn't give the proper pause when there was a comma, and that might throw you off. Again, these visibility flagged data sets about the remarkable ability of the price changes are themselves temporal markers for the dollar collapse, internal market system breakdown, and the bond bubble burst. The following group of temporal markers cannot be sorted as to an order. Their placement here is as the lexicon's alphabet arrangement places them. In other words, this is the order in which the webbot spit it out. He didn't alphabetize it or sort it. The order of appearance within model space as it was progressed was so simultaneously as to not allow for adequate discrimination. Therefore, the next temporal markers are to be considered as appearing more or less simultaneously, you could say, so far as the populace will have visibility of the process. The next thing here, largest bubble burst in history. Got a little popcorn, hang on. A little popcorn in the teeth with the kids. We're watching a little TV with the kids for a little while. Largest populace on the planet, China, will offer the renminbi as a global reserve currency. And guess what? Much of the planet's financial addicts will mob the offering. The data sets pointing to this occurrence suggest that it will be within the larger period when the American financial empire is reeling from the derivatives explosion. Note that the explosion language is very specific and has for years maintained growth in two areas that specifically related to the explosion descriptor. First, that nothing remains following the derivatives explosion as the center is consumed leaving only fading smoke after the explosion. The second set has continually focused on people thinking themselves investors who will be caught out by the rapidity of events such that they cannot recover funds/wealth from the system as it is crumbling. This area appears to be referencing the initial wave of a planetary bond collapse. Outside of the officialdom sets, there are several market-related sets that indicate that additional major temporal markers include the desperate hunt for short-term churn/turnover assets. These sets lead to visibility language that include a raid on the vault. These sets appear to be about a blatant assault on a gold store. While it is easy to envision the banksters in yet another raid, this data point marker seems rather to be about honorable criminals, not bankers. In other words, what you would think locally as a criminal gang stealing. And that's why he's saying an honorable criminals, not bankers, because bankers are not honorable criminals. They are the worst kind of criminals. So that's why he's got that in there. So there's going to be a theft of assault something on a gold store. While it is easy to envision the banksters in yet another raid, the data points marker seems rather to be about honorable criminals, not bankers, who will be stealing gold at a level not seen in perhaps several hundred years. There are data sets that contain supporting language for a sophisticated criminal scheme that will include a journey through darkness in which multiple tongues, and he says language is most likely somehow recorded and made visible after the raid, are heard to curse it, the darkness. The details describe a cursing of the darkness due to the inability to have a light due to risk. The officialdom number of US of A residents living on $2 a day rises to all-time highs. This could be a whole other paragraph now. Government gains additional 1/3 number of entitlement claimants. So an additional 1/3 gain of entitlement claimants coming soon as the student loan system grinds to a halt, impacting the education industry and rippling out to large-scale food suppliers. This in turn rapidly affects agricultural contracts negatively and participates in the homesteaders movement. I think this is one of the places where it starts to get good in a minute. It is within the poverty wave, systemic separation of financial systems spare no one. So it is within the poverty wave subset that we find the largest number of data sets outside of the food supplies related data sets for riots and social unrest/violence. As a warning, from our understanding of what is going to occur, and this is all his opinion, this is all his interpretation of the data that Cliff High puts together. So keep that in mind as I read this. As a warning, from our understanding of what is going to occur, the aware individual needs to remove themselves from proximity to any rioting or social unrest, as the federal response will be very wide and within their net. Innocence does not exist. Oops, you were standing too close when we fired on so-and-so, or whatever that means. I'm not sure. But that's, I say fired on. I don't know what the action will be. It may not be fired on with a gun, but it could be large scale, gas being dropped, like tear gas or something. And you're like, hey, I'm 2 blocks away, living in my house, outside mowing my lawn or something, and the response happens to send some of those cans your way. Could be as little as that. Could be as worse as actual fighting. Don't know. Next topic here. Commercial real estate collapses. Maybe in the southwest corridor, Louisiana initially, not sure. New industry created as metals thieves begin stripping Skyline. empty or mostly empty buildings in spite of stepped up security. So a new industry, so to speak, will be created as metals thieves. That does not necessarily mean gold and silver, just metal, copper, steel, etc. New industry created as metals thieves begin stripping skyline, empty or mostly empty, buildings in spite of stepped up security. Homesteader movement infiltrates commercial structures. Law enforcement too bogged down with social unrest and rising crimes against the police to attend to creeping movement of families/tribes covertly converting empty commercial space into housing. In some areas, the language describes the homesteader movement as strong enough to have its own internal peace officers, not police, peace officers who will be presenting some of the more reasonable local police officialdom with questions of displace a functioning, more or less stable social order, and in the process unleash yet more troubles for their already overburdened police forces. Efforts at attempts to enforce by lawyers, he says, efforts to attempt to enforce foreclosures on commercial real estate that has been homesteaded, this new type of homesteaded, are met with deafening hoots of derision and do not work. Police are too outnumbered and too poor to sustain efforts to evict. This is the interesting part. Homesteader/tribe take over the largest bank-held real estate in XX state. I don't know if he's leaving the state out on purpose, but he's just referring to it as XX. Law enforcement from XX state defers confrontation with mainstream media labeled squatters as internal budget woes and collapse of the retirement funds induced labor chaos within state government. Federal troops are ordered in to evict the squatters. Media promises to cover the battle royale, and he says that's a hint. Battle royale is a hint. Get ready for that term. I don't know. It's coming. He just says hint. Little Easter egg. Don't know what it means. Not yet, anyways. So federal troops will be ordered in to evict the squatters because the police are too busy dealing with other things, can't handle it, outnumbered, etc. Media promises to cover the battle royale, hint. Obstacles prevent timely arrival of federal resources as state government refuses to fund costs of National Guard. Homesteaders/tribes dig in with large amounts of outside assistance. Siege mentality takes hold in XX state government as federal soldiers head for the confrontation. This is just the start of a large homesteading movement that becomes a self-organizing collective in many areas as popular/populist seizures, as in taking something, seizing it, of bank-owned properties for distribution to homeless families. Now, as I'm reading this, again, this is a forecast for 2013. Most of this. Now, they didn't get too specific here. So when I said in the beginning, don't stand here looking at 2013, the first 2 or 3 months, and say, hey, none of this happened. I've been following this webbot for long enough to know that it can call something well in advance of the time it thought it would happen, and then it happens a good bit later. Which, again, the longer we have to deal with this, probably the better, honestly. More time to prep, more time to buy silver, more time to maybe move out of the city and move somewhere, etc. So there's no way in my mind that all of this is going to happen in 2013. I've never seen a Webbot report that accurate with the whole report happening exactly on the time frame it said. So just keep that in mind. In other homesteader news, there are a cascading series of temporal markers for such as a seizure of lands-based asset of the, and it's got 4 X's, XXXX Corporation by citizens populace of US of A, as the corporation claims bankruptcy over a lawsuit in which the citizens win but are shafted anyways. And he says this is a hint here. So another homestead Homesteader News, there's a cascading series on temporal markers. So temporal markers, look for this event to happen, or events multiple times, this kind of thing happening, such as a seizure of land-based asset, so land, property, real estate, something, of the XXX Corporation by citizens of the US of A, as the corporation, banking corporation, whatever, claims bankruptcy over a lawsuit. So they filed for bankruptcy over a lawsuit in which the citizens actually win, but are still shafted. That's the hint. They're still shafted. Seizure emulates the self-proclaimed tribe of homesteaders in XX state. As part of the temporal marker, the data sets have indicated that the homesteaders will be unlike or different from the portrayal within the MSN prostitutes. So you and I already know how the prostitutes on mainstream TV are going to consider these people. Animals, savages, rebels, etc. So get ready for that. When in reality, they're just human beings trying to live in a country in which they were raped and pillaged. That's what the truth's going to be. The data sets indicate that the homesteaders will be repairing properties. Hey, good job, guys. And building off-grid infrastructure in spite of officialdom warnings not to. The data sets are also quite clear that the homesteaders do not participate with the officialdom's game. That's the best way to deal with it. And are able to clearly demonstrate superior gaming skills against these people, these minions, etc. This is a very good temporal marker, as the mainstream media prostitutes are indicated to pump a great deal of propaganda on the subject. This temporal marker is a precursor to the separated nations temporal marker. This temporal marker, in the absence of the global coastal event, would lead to a breakup of the American empire. Now that's an interesting statement. Federal government institutes a spreading transportation lockdown in search for homesteader activists, terrorists, aka econo-terrorists. They believe, again, these are words the mainstream is going to be using, they believe to be traveling to reinforce the activities of these terrorist homesteaders at the XXXX lawsuit / shafting site where they got shafted. Or so it would seem. This temporal marker is a very interesting one in that it precedes an absolute brawl that will break out between passengers / citizens and minions from the TSA agency as they search the paralyzed transportation avenues for these eco-terrorist homesteader groups. The data sets around this incident include details suggesting that some form of organizing group, that is traveling together will form the core that the other hundreds of passengers will ring or join. Additional note, words based on protection, compassion, disabled, children, molested, crying, screaming, pain, and blood. So, the data sets are, I'm going to skip that little part. Protection, compassion, disabled, children, molested, crying, screaming, pain, blood. Because he kind of threw that in, and it's going to make it sound odd if I try to read all that. It's just an additional note. The data sets around this incident include details suggesting that some form of organization / group that is traveling together will form the core that the other hundreds of passengers will join just before the passengers / citizens are described as encountering collective blood rage. Unfortunately for the TSA agency and the powers that be in their minions, the paralyzing / shutdown of the transportation grid, additional note over region X, ? So unfortunately for the TSA and the powers that be in their minions, the paralyzing / shutdown of the transportation grid for so many hours has cultured the conditions for a perfect storm of outrage, and as the TSA personnel become aware of the rage incident in XXXX city, so do the frustrated passengers all over the transportation grid. The flurry of rumors go out on cell phones and iPads and tablets and everything else very fast, and end up streaming into all the affected region, just ahead of the orders by panic-stricken TSA people to shut down the cell phone towers. This act in itself is the temporal marker as it spreads the state of panic from within the transportation grid to the area at large. Then the visibility of the rage brawl involving hundreds of people over several hours, spreading to hundreds of locations and thousands of people, initiates a federal response which the data indicates fails to arrive or at least in a timely fashion, such that the TSA agency as a whole is described as beaten, broken, demoralized, and defeated. This marker has some small number of indicators placing it during April, as there are taxes associated emotional words extensively filling model space at this time. Again, is it April of 2013, April of 2014, April of 2015? Just remember the story here I'm reading you, because I can assure you it will make sense one of these days in the near future. And it may not be April 2013. And I'll to be honest, who wants to deal with that right now? Who wants to deal with this? I know we have to, and we will. But it almost seems like, yeah, if we can stretch out a little bit longer, might not be a bad idea, you know? The data sets have a temporal marker for the state of California and then other western states to form state banks within each of those states. This marker was cross-linked extensively to the Federal Reserve breakdown. This marker is indicated to appear during the Western World Planetary Bond Crisis. As a marker, temporal marker, the rise of state banks is shown as a precursor to rebuilding here in America after the implosion of the federal criminal banking system comes unglued. This temporal marker of the language about state banks is shown as being a prohibited subject for the mainstream media prostitutes and will produce most of the initial visibility within alternative and purely local media. And this next thing is titled The End of Aid. I'm talking foreign aid. This can't come fast enough. But at the same time, when it happens for a reason, because somebody's broke, and it's called America. Some of the newer data sets from late 2012, even though frothing with immediacy data types, nonetheless are indicating that in 2013, the U.S. government becomes bereft to the point that all aid, money going overseas, ceases. As a precursor to this point, we have a temporal marker for cessation/blockage of international wire transfers, primarily to South America. This data set is also participating in the temporal markers around the bond bubble burst and the banks exploding and the dollar death and freak out, extreme bad hair day, he says, in officialdom. The temporal marker of the blockage of dollars going south is mixed in with many of those in which the prostitutes participate in market circuitous negative feedback loop. The temporal marker of the federal government turning over all wire transfers out of the country to the TSA group is a precursor to the abandonment during the bond crisis of international aid from the USA. The shift in power over the wire transfers will also indicate the pending shrinkage of the U.S. Postal Service at levels that are described as shocking to the people, or sheeple. And then there's a thing titled, Bring the Guilty Bastard In, We'll Give Him a Fair Trial. A number of temporal markers are indicating that the mainstream media prostitute, media whores, will be spewing forth a stream of words about the abduction and virtual torture. Additional note, the mainstream media will use the word torture. It is not my choice. So, a number of markers indicating that the mainstream media prostitutes, media whores, will be spewing forth a stream of words about the abduction and virtual torture of prominent citizens/celebrities. The real story on this is going to be hotly contested, apparently, in the alternative media as the culprits/kidnappers release series of justice-served videos in which their prisoners are put on public trial for crimes against humanity. The data shows that the officialdom will be basically freaking and crapping bricks, as the mainstream media prostitutes are clearly failing at controlling the spin. Note that the data is unclear in this data set, such that it could be that the spin machine has or has lost against videos about the trials of prominent criminals, but that the actual trial never even took place. In this set, there are indicators that the videos will be created images and not necessarily real. The idea coming from the detail sets is that the video engineered image of the trial is sufficient enough to cause mental changes. In other sets, in the details of the culprit, the data suggests that skilled hands create CGI. In other words, that's like creating fake video, fake, things like that, that kick minds. The detail sets suggest that so many people view the trials of the criminals at the top that the guilty powers that be and in fear of perception change. Let me try that again. The detail sets suggest that so many people with... Did I say let me try that again? No. What I really meant was let me try that a third time. The detail sets suggest that so many people view the trials of the criminals at the top that the guilty powers that be are in fear of perception change. The data would tend to support this fear of perception change in the populace, as there are cross-links over to the public displays of disgust in presence of former celebrities. Many of these sets over the years since 2003 have continued to support the idea of flooding. This is a whole other topic, I think. Flooding at huge levels and very much globally. Not only the coastal cities, but also inland areas cities are also flooded. In this case, however, almost all of the flooding is due to rain inundations. These inundations are also described as being beyond excessive to anything previously encountered. These sets also produce the 2004 forecast for river in the atmosphere. The sets have gained supporting sets for mountains eroded by the rains and other sets of similar vein. In these sets, the rivers of rain are described as producing tens of inches of rain per hour as a direct result of the cause, whatever the cause is, of the global coastal event. In some sets, the data describes new inland seas and new lakes that will manifest. Some of these are not associated with low-lying areas that exist now, but are rather described as being the result of combination of land formation sinking/sinkholes and torrents of rain. In several areas of inland production/industry, the data sets describe whole populations of cities inland being put to the foot as they flee the flooding, in which their habitation/city is flooded by muds, rains, brackish waters that will rumble/roar down mountains several days and weeks after the global coastal event. The supporting sets for the global coastal event contain sets that are geographically associated with inland areas in the vast Eurasian plains. These included many sets for flooding that will affect both sides of the Caucasus Mountains, a key division line for effects. The data suggests that the torrential rains as well as winds will be clashing over the Caucasus mountain range. The idea is that forces from both the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, eastern sides of the Caucasus mountain range. It is as though the data sets are describing a winds battle over the Caucasus, where the winds generated by the global coastal event from different sides will collide. This is seen within the data as being an area of downpours of quite staggering proportions, as water from both Atlantic and Indian Oceans are condensed out of the atmosphere. A planet-wide component of the global coastal event has been discussed in previous reports as coming from the nuclear energy production facilities. These include not only the known nuclear power plants, but also a number of secret, perhaps hundreds of production facilities, nuclear, that are being operated by government and the breakaway civilization. Many of these secret nuclear facilities will never be known for what they are, but will nonetheless be known to future generations as a place of contamination. Other nuclear energy or other production facilities, such as coastal generation plants, are described as being swept away. These sets include language about the plant in a destroyed way, being moved hundreds of miles away from their point of origin. A significant portion of the global coastal event data has been supported by the various sets for earthquakes that we have had over the years. The global coastal event itself contains a supporting set for a planet-affecting earthquake at the time of the global coastal event itself. So, let me stop for a second. Talking about these winds that come up and these downpours of rain, tens of inches per hour. And just hear me out, because I've been focused on this webalt for a long time. Courtney Brown, the remote viewing. What it looks like, the Earth is going to be hit with something, maybe a meteor, in the water, one of the oceans. And think about that. The speed of the meteor, it's going to be so burning hot. When that thing hits, it's going to vaporize whatever it hits immediately. And if it hits the ocean, it will vaporize some part of the ocean, obviously. Not the whole damn thing, probably a small area. But small is probably huge for as far as we're concerned. And if that vaporizes, that means water vapor goes into the air in a massive scale, because it just got cooked by this meteor. So then the global coastal event hits, the air's flying in the wind, the wind's flying all over because of that event, the shock wave, so to speak. This is my opinion. Man, my nose itches. And then that water, precipitation, whatever, is now in the air above Earth, all over the, in the atmosphere, whatever, and now has to be dealt with. And naturally, Mother Nature deals with it, and it dumps on everybody. This, to me, sounds more like a hypothesis that makes sense of why that kind of downpour would happen, global coastal event. It would happen a week or two later, you know what I mean? That's my opinion. So, in the earthquake data set, there are descriptors for down/destroyed bridges in a range of over 1,000 miles. This is concurrent in the data with planetary electrical distribution problems, some of which persist for decades thereafter. Other more ancillary effects of the global coastal event include airports blown away and airports underwater. There are also ports underwater. In this set, the water levels are described as higher than cranes. Higher than a crane. Interesting word to choose. There are also descriptors for ports in which the quays are gone or ground to rubble. I'm almost done, by the way. One of the sets relating to the UFOs now, within the last 2 years, has growth in supporting areas for time travelers. The idea now coming across since the addition of the last data set collected in fall of 2012 is that a series of very intense local occurrences will be happening from early 2013 through to nearly its end. These local occurrences are described as being the nexus of a vehicle containing life that is transiting time at vast levels and will become visible here on Earth as it moves through our local time system. The descriptors include a consistent flashing object that will be viewed by the masses as it appears daily. The masses will become enthralled as the giant object with life is indicated to become something of a sensation over several months. Apparently, this object will be able to be viewed across many parts of the Earth. This may have something to do with it being spread through time. The data sets indicate that some humans will be able to interact with the giant object / time traveler thing, and even though it will be in our local time for only those few months, it is indicated to have a very long, multiple generations impact on the social order. Final paragraph here. Within the outer space entity, there are huge levels, an entity meaning like the data set, there are huge levels of cross-links going to the global coastal event. In most of these, and again, outer space, meteor hits the ocean, sounds more legit. In most of these, the outer space entity contains sets that view further out into the future than do the other sets within the larger global coastal event sets within other entities. In these further sets within the outer space entity, the global coastal event is followed by a colonization wave from space. This colony Earth effort has been described for years within the data as an element of the future that the remnants / rebuilder humans will be living around / among. We have had data sets growing in support over the years that show that several areas of the Gulf Coast of North America and Mediterranean and Black Seas will have colonies from space that will settle while the local human inhabitants are in the process of recovery after being moved inland by instability in coastal regions. Some of these populations will then be forced back toward to the new coastlines by the pollution, both nuclear and industrial, that is described as forcing yet another evacuation. Many of these regions are described as being uninhabitable for generations to come. In some of these sets, there are smaller detail sets that provide for excursions into the areas in special suits. That is the notes that I took. This particular webbot's around 22 or so pages total. Technically 25, but actual webbot's probably like 22 pages. I left some stuff out, as I always do. I just pick what I feel I want to read, and I read it. So that is it, and take care.